All right, we will call the Norfolk School Building Committee of March 19th to order. Our first agenda item is reviewing and approving minutes from our last meeting, which was on February 15th. As Medora says every time, everybody did their homework. Anybody see anything they need amended or don't agree with? All right, if not, I need a motion to approve the minutes from February 15th.
So moved.
Second?
Second motion.
Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Great. Now, moving on, we have a presentation from Demographic Analytic Advisors, which we have been waiting for with bated breath. So without further ado, unless you want to kick it off, Ingrid.
I can turn it over to Christopher Dick, who is going to present the preliminary report from DAA Advisors that includes both the history and the enrollment forecast for Norfolk.
Perfect.
Should have the slides.
All right, so I'm assuming everyone can see the slides again since I had to run away for the...
Yes.
Time. We're all good? Okay.
All good.
Well, very excited to chat with you all tonight about this demographic study and forecast. So just to start out, kind of as this was laid out when we were starting the process, there was a bit of concern. While enrollment has generally increased for Norfolk Public Schools over the past decade, a recent forecast by NESDEC was slightly higher than the actual enrollment over the past couple of years. I understand that before decisions are made about any changes to school buildings, our team was brought in to kind of take a second at these forecasts. So we have here on the right just the delta between the actual enrollment for pre-K through 6 versus the NESDEC forecast. You can see on the right side there, there's just a slight upturn. So a little bit about our approach. I know we had talked to y'all a month or so prior to this, but I want to just kind of rehash a little bit of how we approach these things. So when forecasting enrollment, we generally want to be looking at changes in enrollment. We want to be looking at historical enrollment trends, changes in population dynamics, changes in housing dynamics, and changes in the market share of public and non-public education. One issue that consistently looms over our building of enrollment forecast, both here in Norfolk and throughout the country, is what will the staying power of COVID-19 related impacts? So that's something we're always going to be. Overall, the methodology for this particular project, and honestly for a lot of our projects, is to begin with a base plan that is based off of births and a grade progression ratio. So a lot of similarities to the way that NESDEC look at this, and how a lot of others look at this. Where we add is we start looking at a couple different impacts as well. We want to look at the impacts of new bills on student yield. We want to look at the impacts of a change in market share. And we want to look at the impacts of COVID anomalies, whether they are positive or negative. And there's some differences happening throughout the different school districts throughout the country. So I am a total bottom line front guy, so we're going to start with the outline here, and then we're going to talk through how we got there. So in this chart on the right, you are going to see 3 different lines. In red, we have the actual NESDEC K through 6. Now, just keeping pre-K out there. But the NESDEC K through 6 enrollment forecast that was created in 2022. Then we have 2 other lines that are both actuals as well as forecasts that we have created. We have what I'm calling the DAA K through 6. This is public school enrollment for K through 6. And then all K through 6, which is also created by us. This is all enrollment for students who are living in Norfolk, including non-public options. So a couple things that I want to note here. There was a shift in non-public enrollment beginning in the 2022-23 school year. as we'll see when we're talking through this, it's based on one inflated cohort in non-public education. It's a kindergarten cohort from 2022 to 23. As we'll talk through in the presentation, we have reasons to believe this. There have been some increases in non-public education, but this big inflation of this kindergarten class seems to not have staying power. It seems to be an anomaly. We forecast that shift because of the way that kindergarten class is going to age through the process to kind of stay through what we're seeing in our forecast until the 2028-29 school year, which is when that kindergarten class will graduate from 6th grade and go into 7th and will no longer have an impact on our K-6 forecast. We don't forecast the same decline that NASDAQ was seeing over the end of our forecast period. And the reason is really this. Number one, as we'll see, we don't really see a decline in births happening. We also don't really see a decline in the relatively stable levels of migration that you all see in general. So that's the really, really high level. And then now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going. So we also, I know everyone loves a table. So I also provided a table of our forecast. Again, I'll just talk through this, and then y'all can take a look at it. But what we have here, very similar to a lot of demographic projects enrollment forecasts. We want to have our birth year, our number of births. You'll notice our birth year is 5 years before the first year of the school year. There's a reason for that, we'll talk about it. So we have our school year, and then we have enrollment for each of the grades. We have our forecast, pre-K through 6. We have our forecast, kindergarten through 6th grade. We have our year-over-year enrollment change. So this would be, if we're looking at the very first line and the second line, it would be the percent change between those two. And then we have the NASDAQ forecast for kindergarten through 6th grade. The difference between our forecast and theirs, with ours being the first number, so negative numbers means we are lower than NASDAQ. And the percent in public school, that will become important as we're talking through this, as well as our last students forecast. Okay. So let's start a little bit. The first thing we did when we heard kind of what this setup was for this project is we wanted to compare, as you all have been, the actual enrollment versus the forecast that we're creating 2 years ago. So we've already seen this chart. We know there's a delta, but we want to start looking at this grade level. And this is where we start seeing some really interesting things. We see pre-K is fine. We see kindergarten. Not fine for 1 year. Something happened. And that in this school year right here, we have forecasts that was much higher than the actual. Go up to 1st grade, we're okay. The next year, our forecast is much higher. As those kindergartners get into 1st grade, the NASDAQ forecast is much higher. Right now, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 2nd grade is not going to look good next year. The forecast is not going to look good. The year after that, 3rd grade is going to look good. Then 4th grade, then 5th grade, then 6th grade, then everything's going to look good. So that is really hard. And we have this one cohort of kindergartners that are making things look kind of crazy. And I have my different thoughts on this. I've talked with Dr. Lardy. We both have our hypotheses. I think several of them are supported on what's going on. But I really, for several reasons, I think this is a kind of one-off. So let's take a little look at the kindergarten enrollment specifically. I know those charts are kind of small. Some of you are kind of far from the screen. Let's just have a slightly bigger chart, the same as what we were just looking at, but just for kindergarten. So here we can see 2022-23 wasn't over forecast. NASDAQ was significantly higher than what actually occurred for public school enrollment. 2023-24 was to be spot on. And we already know for next year, 144 students, actually 145 now, have already signed up for kindergarten next year. And usually on average, between now and the start of the school year, we get about 10 more students. So the forecast looks to be generally right on for next year. Really, the dip in that 25, 26, and I'm sure this was already explained to you when you had these forecasts done, it's really when the low birth year of 2020 enters kindergarten. So 2020 in Norfolk and Massachusetts overall, honestly throughout the country, was a low birth. It was kind of an anomaly, and then there was a big bounce back in 2021 as this numbers continued to increase. So we can see the same pattern here that we talked about with first grade. It's just all shifted 1 year. So instead of 22, 23, the year that we're on now is 23, 24. So everything is shifted just that 1 year. And then the expectation is this is going to come back as our current kindergartners, which we have over 160 of, age into first grade. So that was kind of the setup for me, and started to think, okay, what do we actually need to look at in order to create these comparative population forecasts? So the first thing we always want to look at is population age. And luckily, for you all, you have a really great program out of the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute to create population forecasts for all the towns, demographic characteristics, every 2 years in the state of Massachusetts. It's fantastic. The population of children in Norfolk is forecast to stay relatively stable over our forecast period. It's actually forecast to decline just a little and then stay perfectly stable. However, I was talking to the person who runs this program, and because we're both demographers and we like to nerd out about things, one of the issues they have currently in the forecasts is they underestimate the movement of children from cities like Boston into the suburbs. So one of the things that you'll see here is the age 30 to 44 population, this darker gray color. This population is increasing. Yet children are still declining and are stable. What we kind of came to as we were discussing, and a change that they're actually making from the forecast moving forward to try to capture this, is that those children numbers should actually increase slightly to go with the 30 to 44 population. So our expectation based on that is that we should have a relatively stable and slowly growing pre-K to 6th grade population, all else being equal. So this isn't talking about where they're going to go, public, non-public, but it should be a relatively stable, slowly growing pre-K to 6th stage population. So how about births? Well, as I noted, births were actually, other than that 2020 year, we're actually kind of on a slow increase. Births really increased in Norfolk, and we're going to go back historically, back to the 1980s. They were really increasing. Kind of held steady throughout the 90s into the late 90s, and then declined steadily through their low point in 2013. There's some similarities and some differences here from Massachusetts overall, as well as from other parts of the country. In a lot of places, there was actually a run-up in births. The decline actually started flattening out and even increasing into 2007, the housing level burst, and then everyone declined everywhere. Here we see generally just almost monotonic decline, few bumps. However, post-2013, other than that really, again, kind of weird 2020 COVID year, we are seeing some increases in births, both in Norfolk and throughout the country. And one of the big reasons there is that some of the larger millennial cohorts are aging into those child ages. Our expectation here and our forecast is built off of averaging several different models, but it builds a kind of boring time series. It looks like a pretty flat line, but births should continue to slowly increase and then stabilize throughout the forecast period. Okay, so let's think a little bit about enrollment trends. This is stuff that I'm sure all of you have already kind of looked at. You already know it frontwards and backwards, but we're going to talk about it anyways. If we look at the splits between schools, in general, other than that 2022-23, we've been seeing slow increases since about the 2014-15 school year. Now, it's been slightly different by school. If you're looking at pre-K through second grade, we've had a couple years where we've had small dips. But in general, it has been this slow increase with that slight bump down in 22-23. So, as we're starting to think about this, I talked earlier about how we really like to look at births and grade progression ratio. So when I say grade progression ratio for birth, that's really not grade progression. What are they going to progress from? It's not like we don't build it from pre-K to kindergarten. But really what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to look at birth ratio. Specifically, we want to look at the proportion of births 5 years ago who become kindergartners in a parent. Here, a value above 1 means pretty straightforward. More kids are independent than were born in Norfolk 5 years ago. That means there's a migration. Pretty straightforward, right? Below 1 is the opposite issue. There's out-migration. There are less people, or all the students are going into non-public options. And there are lots of places where we see that. Norfolk is not one of those places. You all have a very high kindergarten to birth ratio. This is honestly, this kindergarten birth ratio, a lot of places would mean a very, very fast growing school. But what we're going to talk about later means that you're only growing in kindergarten classes. And really what we're seeing is people make the choice with their children to move to Norfolk before their kids get into school. And then, as we'll see here in a couple slides, they don't change their minds. They just generally stay. They stay with, if their kids in kindergarten, they're going to stay through 6th grade. And that's where we start looking. We didn't like where people move after 6th grade, and then they stay in high school and middle school. But in general, that is really the trend. So what do we see here? Norfolk has consistently above 1 birth to kindergarten ratio, at least since 2013-14. 2022-23 really looks to be it. Why might that be? We have a couple hypotheses. I'm going to talk about home sales later. But another phenomenon I want to talk about is the idea of people, especially kind of post-COVID, redshirting some of their kindergartners. And the idea here is just like you would think in sports, it's waiting 1 more year to give a kid 1 more year before they go into kindergarten. And what we can do is we can actually look at the age of kindergarten for each of these years. And what we noticed in 2020-21 is kind of a higher proportion of 6+-year-olds in kindergarten, but we see the highest proportion that we've ever seen in Norfolk in 23. So what that means is some of those, now 6-year-olds would have been 5-year-olds who would have been eligible for kindergarten last year and did not sign. So that helps explain some. And the really interesting thing here, I'm sorry, these are kind of ugly charts, but statisticians love these type of charts, and area density plots, histograms. But what we're really looking at is age here across the x-axis, and it just counts of students on the y-axis. And what we see is there's always a spread between 5 and 6 of students going into kindergarten as of August 31st at 5 or 6. But what we see in 23-24 is a different looking pattern. We have 2 peaks. We have one of the normal peaks at the 5-year-old age, and we have a larger peak than we've seen at the 6th grade, going into the 6th age. And that is a classic kind of red shirting that I've seen in several instances. So if we stop looking just at kindergarten grades, we start looking at grade progression ratios for the other grades, how does it work? Really, grade progression ratio is stable of K-12 forecasting. They're great because if things are relatively stable in the population, they can account for everything. People moving in, people moving out. They can account for how many people tend to drop out of school, things like that as you're getting into higher grades. They're great. They allow us to understand historical patterns and who stays or leaves the school district. And really, they're pretty simple in terms of calculation. They're the number of students in a grade period, first grade, divided by the number of students in the prior grade last year, so in this case, kindergartners. A number close to 1 here, again, means people who were in kindergarten ended up in first grade. If the number is below 1, it could mean people are moving out, people are making different school choices, or people are being held back. Those are kind of the 3 options. Norfolk, grade progression ratios for grade 1 through 6 are some of the closest to 1 I have seen in my entire career. They are very, very, very close to 1. This means that once you decide to go to Norfolk Public Schools, you finish out public schools in general. It also means that not many people move into the district contract. Like, people make their decisions beforehand, they want to keep the kids in the schools. I was talking about earlier, I live in a very similar place right outside of the DC. I think people do like kind of exactly the same thing. So I'm starting to wrap my head around this. I used to live in the city, but I'm wrapping my head around it. I'm starting to understand. And this is supported by some data that the team at Norfolk has actually collected as well, where they looked and asked students and their parents for next year how many plan to come next year. I believe Dr. Mallory, I think you said 2 students said they plan on moving.
Yeah, we're going to, when we do the enrollment survey, we sent out to our current students, we have 900 responses, and 898 are returning to our moving to another town. So, yeah, it's stable, as you said.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, in general, people make their decisions early and they stick with them. But I would say the same thing when we talk about, when we're talking about folks who've chosen charter, private, or homeschools. People tend to stick with those decisions as well, which is why we actually see throughout the period, throughout the forecast period, that one cohort of kindergartners where that decision was made, we're forecasting them to just age through the decision that they made, either homeschool, charter, or private school, and not come back to public schools. So that's why we're a little bit lower than NESDEC, and then we kind of cross over and actually grow beyond this field. So I'm just going to show each of these because it's kind of hilarious how exactly the same they are. But this is the first grade progression ratio. Then second, we had a bump in 2014, 2015. Maybe a couple kids moved in second grade. Third grade, no real bumps. Fourth grade, even less bumps. Fifth grade, about the same. Sixth grade, literally 0 bumps. So, I mean, these are all very, very, very close. Okay, so that's kind of our look at public enrollment trends. I also want to look a little bit at private, because this is where we have some of that concern. And if we look at this, I don't want to say school choice hasn't had an impact on Norfolk Public Schools. Norfolk Public Schools would have been growing slightly faster had more folks not chosen non-public options over the last couple of years. However, the big increase in the 2022-23 school year, you can see it on the chart there, it is really driven by that light blue kindergarten class. There's some others that look slightly bigger. If you look at the 5th grade class right here, it looks slightly bigger than it did the year before. But if you look at 4th graders the year before, they were bigger. It's just the 4th graders aging in. So you're seeing a lot of cohort patterns here. And really, the big thing is we have the 22-23 school year. The problem with non-public enrollment, we won't know this school year's enrollments, other than we do have a homeschool number, which is about the same as last year. We won't know the other non-public school enrollment types until June. So we can't really put them on here. What we do know is that kindergarten enrollment for this year for Norfolk Public Schools was up. It was up 166. So our takeaway here is that we know public school kindergarten in 23-24 increased back to expected levels. So we expect kindergarten for 23-24 non-public to really be back in line with expectations. Because we don't feel like we saw a big jump in migration. Okay, speaking of which, migration, housing development, home sales, student yield. We want to talk through this as well. So, one of the other issues that we have that I think maybe decreased the number of students who came into Norfolk Public Schools in 22-23 was the increase in inflation, the tie of that to the increase in interest rates and the decrease in the number of home sales in 22 and then even more in 20. So, I mean, we can see here, you know, the home sales are obviously very spiky, they're seasonal. We have a big spike in July of 2020. But basically since then, we have seen a decrease in home sales. Back to even lower than historical averages. So we can see this look here. We're not looking at the yearly, if we're not looking at the monthly, we just look at the yearly numbers. We're back in 23, we're actually lower than any year since 2019. So 24, maybe it's starting to rebound a little. I'm hearing some murmurings in different places about that. You know, this does have an impact on those folks being able to make those decisions to move, say, from city and bring kindergartners into Norfolk. And I think that had a bigger impact over the last couple of years. And I think we're, you know, it seems like we're starting to, at least. The other thing that we really want to look at is the number of homes that are being built and the number of students who come from those homes. So the first thing we always want to look at, you know, we know a lot of them because I've been built up for a while, but we want to look at the number of residential units and that decade. So obviously we're early in the 2020s. We haven't had a ton of building yet completed. But if we look in the 2010s, there was an uptick in building. Back as high as it's been since the 1980s in terms of building in Norfolk. The other thing that we want to look at is actual parcel building costs. The reason we want to do this is we want to know for newer homes, not just all homes, but newer homes that have been built, how many students attend those homes. So we want to look at those buildings by year builds. We want to look at buildings by family type, are they multi or single family? And then there's another chart that I would love to show, but I will not because it's individual level data, is we actually then superimpose students on top of these parcels. And we say, in X school year, this student was living in this home. When was that home built? And the reason we want to do that is we want to know, as a new home is built, over the first 5 years of that home being built, on average, how many students is it going to yield for Norfolk schools from historically? So what we find, and there's a reason for weirdness that there are some pre-2020 students who are living in 2020 homes. We fix it. It's really hard to explain. It's weird, but just bear with me on this. What we see is, in general, newer builds, at least after a few years of the decade, if we look at the 2010s and we look at how student yield went as we got to the end of the decade, tend to have the same or higher yield than newer homes. That's really all seems to be taken away from this chart. I know it's a lot of things. What we really want to understand is in the first 5 years, what is the average yield? Here we do it by grade, but we also want it for the time. And overall, what we see is kind of in the first year, year 0, through the 5th year, we expect somewhere between 0.3 and 0.45 students per new housing unit that is built in the city of Norfolk. That's just kind of your historical trend. With that, we know that right now there are 148 units that are currently approved and under construction. I'm not necessarily looking at the just approved here, but the ones that are approved and currently under construction. 108 of these are not age restricted. So we have the enclave that is age restricted. I would expect that to be students in K through 6, at least at a high level. So given that, we're really looking at adding something between 32 to 49 public school students to the forecast, given that amount of building over the next 3 to 5 years. It's kind of how we look. Now, the one caveat on that, As we've talked to the folks at the planning department, one thing that has been kind of slowing some of this down, and I've seen it from the NESDEC report because a few of these were approved and being built in 2022 as well, is things have slowed down. And it sounds like some of the issues, just in general, some of the COVID logistics issues, but also it's getting utility requests. So it seems like some of these should be starting to get considered finished, but you know, our assumption here is still we're assuming the same thing for a couple of these units that were expected to be finished and have students in them in 3 to 5 years. 2 years ago, we're still assuming 3 to 5 years. This is part of that right now. Okay, that was a lot. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here to the actual final forecast. We already had a meeting to look at the numbers, look at the chart, and people like looking at numbers. But that really is the whirlwind tour through how we got to this table where basically we're saying we're going to be a little bit lower for a couple of years, but not terribly lower and still growing. And then towards the end of the forecast period, we're actually going to get to the point where we're a little bit higher than estimates. And with that, I will pass it back to you.
So Chris, one of the things I just wanted to clarify, through the process, we had identified with the NESDEC forecast that it was pretty on trend for the first few years and then there was a gap. Through the research that you have participated in with your colleagues, you believe that gap is due to a low enrollment year following COVID that was driven by multiple factors. One, more students choosing private or non-public options, a slowdown in real estate sales, and a delay in some of these units coming on. So the gap that you predict over the next few years from your projections to NESDEC, you feel was related to those unexpected COVID factors.
And it is literally that group of students aging through.
Right.
Aging through kindergarten through 6. Okay. So it's really just that one cohort. The only additional factor that I would add there for that one low year is also the redshirting.
Right. Right, and we had, so redshirting just means that kids were eligible to enroll in kindergarten, parents chose to delay. We definitely, post-COVID, had parents feeling they didn't have a real preschool because it was remote, and so I would support your hypothesis that was borne out in the data that you looked at for that. Okay, so those factors drove the change, but as we're starting to see that recovery, we have more kids back in school, more enrolling, fewer, going out. You're expected that we're going to catch up with the NESDEC forecast in the next about 4 years, and then actually grow at a faster rate than they originally forecasted. So your overall projections aren't dramatically different. It's just that the growth is happening a few years later. Is that accurate to say?
That is accurate.
Okay. Questions?
I have a question.
Move this closer. Just so I'm really clear on what the data was when you were doing sort of that, the deep dive into some of the housing developments, could you even go back a couple slides to where you had them listed out by name, if that's perfect. So you looked at Lakeland Hills, you looked at Waits Crossing, and you did not include the Enclave, obviously, because that's age restricted. So did you also say that there are permits that have been issued that you did not look at because ground has not been broken yet?
Yeah, they're approved. There were 2 others that were approved, but construction wasn't started.
Okay, and I think I know the answer to the question, but I'm just going to put it out there anyway. Your analysis didn't take into account any potentially statutorily mandated zoning changes requiring dense family housing units? Okay.
I did not make any changes after discussion with several different folks.
All right, just making sure. Thank you.
Yep.
One other thing that I just would clarify, I think we talked about it at the first meeting, the difference between the demographic study that DAA conducted and the NESDEC study. Yours was a much deeper analysis. We gave you 10 years of actual student data at the address level so that they could look at, rather than just using a model estimating student yield, you looked at the actual student yield over a 10-year period. Correct on that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Other questions? We don't have the final report yet, but we will have the final report, and when we do, we'll share it with the committee. And then we also talked about, in the proposal, Chris, that you sent, there was a couple of briefings. If we want, and the committee opts to do more of a public briefing so that people can hear and ask questions, we can schedule that virtually with you at a later time.
Of course.
Great, excellent.
Yeah, this was very thorough and easy to understand, so thank you. Wouldn't have been able to do it just as a chart, so I really appreciate that.
Excellent. Great, thank you so much. And if we have other questions, you can send them to me and I can send them to Chris so that we can get them answered in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
They were great, you guys were great to work with. They met all their deadlines and a lot of data requests. I kept going back to Trish, they need all the birth dates for the last 5 years of kindergarten.
You all were great to work with us. You were able to get us all the data that we needed, which is not always something I can say. So, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Karen, we can un-Google the Google Meet. Is that a thing?
Google. Okay, great. So we will move on to our third agenda item, enrollment survey results update, which Ingrid, I assume that's you.
So as we met last, the committee had asked me to do an assessment of our current enrolled students so that we could get a sense of stability at the grade level. I think our data really aligns with what they presented tonight based on past history. But we sent the survey out. You have a summary in front of you of what we received back. We have 901 responses. We have over 1,000 kids, so we're still missing and tracking down about 100, but that's a pretty good response rate. Based on that, 899 of the 901 will be returning next year. We have 2 that are not. One is attending will be going to a private school, and one is moving. So again, we have very little exit from the district. We also sent out the homeschool survey. It's harder to get a return on this, and we heard mostly from people enrolled in parochial, private, and charter schools. It's not surprising that a lot of our homeschool families, because there's a lot of laws protecting privacy rights around homeschool, choose once they decide to not enroll into homeschool, they submit the required forms, but they don't necessarily engage further with the school. We have 16 responses back. We probably have about 70 students that would be eligible to respond, even though we have 90 out. 6th graders, obviously, we didn't survey. Of those, you can see it's split across the grades. Most were non-homeschool families. And it aligns just with what he said. Almost all of the students, 14 of the 16, never attended Norfolk. They opted out prior to kindergarten or in pre-K. A few had indicated they had prior been enrolled in a public school, so that's probably pre-K or K. 13, so of the 16, 1 student left at the pre-K level, enrolled somewhere else and stayed. 13 at the kindergarten, so opted for private options. 1 at 1st grade and 1 at 3rd grade. The 3rd grade student that left indicated in the comment section that it was because of the lack of programming that they felt the schools offered during COVID. So it was a COVID-related transition. Interestingly, the other reasons people gave, 10 of the 16 indicated they were looking for a more rigorous curriculum. They hadn't attended public school, but that was driving part of what they were looking for. 6 indicated they were looking to provide a moral-based curriculum, and 2 indicated concerns about safety and environment. What they indicated in the comments was more, several people talked about space and concerns about space. 3 of the, not everybody wrote comments, but of the comments provided, 3 talked about class sizes being too large, concerns about budget cuts, a couple not interested in a regional middle high school model. All 16 indicate they're remaining out. So I think all of the data we got aligns that when kids leave, they stay out for the 6 years. We've talked about this in the budget presentations. It's a concern when we lose kids to charter, the funding goes with them and they typically stay out. So we lose that funding for multiple years. So of the families that responded, the majority are not returning. And I think in the forecast that they projected, they don't expect any of them to return. There were 2 that indicated that tuition rates may change their decision. Not surprising with the economy and inflation, but the vast majority left prior to entering the Norfolk public schools, which we have been concerned about in terms of the numbers and size in kindergarten, and they remain out. So I think it all aligns with the data presented. We have a very stable population, the majority of new growth, and we've seen that when we looked at, I think I shared enrollment data prior, we saw enrollment grow at HOD fastest. So we were up 100 students in HOD. So it is growth coming into kindergarten, and then it's rolling up to Freeman. So now we're starting to see the increase. We're up at about 40 students next year in Freeman over what we opened at, where we're up over 105 at HOD. So the larger kindergarten classes moving up and going up through the district is primarily what's driving that change. Any questions on our enrollment data? We'll continue to try to get further more responses, but if people aren't in the schools, they're not necessarily interested in responding. I mean, I don't respond to surveys that aren't really directly relevant, so. But happy, any questions on this one?
No, I appreciate the time you guys all put into running the data down.
Yeah, Adrian did a lot of work on that, and I think, like we said, we got a good response rate from our existing students, and there was nothing alarming or different than what they were seeing in the past 10-year trend data. And as I said, they were thorough. We had to give a lot of very detailed data, so I think it's just consistent. So it would indicate that it's valid, good data. So that's all I have.
Yeah.
Questions?
Oh, I think we can move on. All right, now on to the AI3 feasibility study.
So I'll just preface this. When we established the committee, the scope and the job of the committee was for us to explore alternate options to a brick and mortar structure, and specifically the town meeting appropriated funds to explore modular solutions to the growing enrollment. AI3 was contracted to do that next step of the feasibility, so to look at those modular options. I think if we are all comfortable with the enrollment projections, I mean, we have two different studies, they're not that far off. I think the end number is a little higher from DAA, so I think we want to make sure that all proposals will accommodate, that range between what NESDEC projected and what DAA projected. The next step would for AI3 to begin the process of costing out modular options. So Justin is the lead architect, is that correct, for the project for us?
Architect, principal at AI3.
Okay.
Yep.
And so he's going to talk through what they had proposed for the scope of the feasibility on the modular solutions, timeline, and ask any questions, and then we'll talk about where we go next as a committee in terms of overseeing the feasibility work that AI3 will be doing. Great.
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Alardi. In front of you in the packet are 3 slides that we put together real quick. The first slide is the actual NESDEC enrollment projections, and it's what we had based the original feasibility study on. So the feasibility study previously done was for the brick and mortar building. It included programming meetings, meeting with the district, meeting with the working group, and really identifying the scope and the nature of the expansion project. The size of that project was based upon the enrollment numbers shown here. At HOD was 461, at Freeman Kennedy was 688, and the pre-K component was targeted at 105. So that is what the initial feasibility study included. Town meeting, as superintendent noted, wanted more information regarding the modular component. Based upon the presentation this evening, it appears that the numbers are slightly higher from DAA. So next steps from us, and I'll go into more detail, is really taking the NESDEC projections and the DAA projections and looking at how the increase in students would impact the work that we've already done based upon the size of the proposed building. So this is more of for reference here from our starting point, but explaining the process.
So I would just say at the end, the overall net difference, if you can see it in the slides that DAA provided, but the 10-year projections, they're trending fairly close. It's DAA has us at 1,240 versus the 1,187. So it's off by about 60 students spread over the grades.
Right. Yeah, and that is one thing that we're going to be looking at specifically is not the total students for Freeman Kennedy, for instance. It's more of a specific grade because there are certain thresholds to bump up to additional rooms. because there is variability within the number of students per room. So it's automatically, we're going to look at that globally and holistically from a space planning standpoint. Is it, for instance, and this isn't the case, but is it 6 extra classrooms or is it 1 extra classroom? Really, what does that look like based upon the trending data for where those increases are? So looking at the second slide, throughout the process, and really the culmination of what we're working towards is looking at the feasibility for modulars and what the cost associated with the modular component would be. Once we right-size the modulars based upon the enrollment data, we're going to be developing 2 options from a configuration standpoint. One option is a single-story. The other option is a 2-story option. We'll be providing schematic site plans as well, so everybody can see how it fits on the site. But really looking at those 2 different configurations. There's obviously a difference whether you go up or out from a lot of different components, space planning, site utilization, just the modulars themselves supporting that 2nd story, stairs, elevators, etc. So that's why we feel it best to provide 2 options, a single story and a double story, just to fully vet the different components within these modulars. Some consistencies between both of these options. The size is going to be the same. So all of the teaching spaces, the components will all be the same throughout both options. They'll both be located at Freeman Kennedy, and they are not going to be connected to the existing building. And the reason being it triggers a lot of code implications. We can put them really close, but we can't physically connect them to the existing building for building code concerns and issues. So once we develop these 2 floor plan options for a single story and a 2-story option, we will be providing 3 levels of quality for estimates. So in total, 6 estimates. The levels of quality, starting on the right side here, the lowest, the middle, and the high. The lowest is the lowest quality from a durability standpoint, from a construction standpoint. You see these typically only as temporary solutions. 3 to 5 years to address bubbles, but this is really not necessarily a feasible option, but to give everybody a sense of what this level of quality would cost. The mid-level is really no custom configuration, so that's really standard spacing and size of these units with some selection of materials. So by being able to select materials, you can change the aesthetics, the look, what it looks like, as well as the durability. And then the higher level cost is some customization from a layout perspective, still remaining within that modular configuration and dimensions. More options for materials, again, ultimately increasing durability. So there'll be those 3 levels of quality for estimates for option 1, and then those 3 levels of quality for option 2 as well. So a total of 6 options developed. And then schedule, and we can come back to any of this and all of this. So what is proposed here, or it's a proposed schedule. It is the most aggressive schedule as shown. We can absolutely extend it, and really what is shown here is providing this group, this committee here, almost 2 rounds of review for the option layout. We can continue to extend it, we can continue to come back and modify, but really this was to get you the information as quick as possible from this standpoint. Jumping down to the very bottom, again, it was identified town meeting, and I know it's on the agenda for the warrant article, but town meeting committee report, essentially updating in May town meeting, and then targeting a community forum for September, again, to update the committee as a whole for all of this. So really those are our 2 bookmarks and the end of it, and we can backfill from there, and again, what is shown here is the most aggressive option. So March 19th, that's this evening, review the enrollment, discuss the options, and review the timeline. What we had targeted is 3 weeks from now, I believe, April 10th, for meeting again. That is reviewing the 2 modular options in a rough schematic standpoint. April 24th, we're back again 2 weeks later, looking at the options again and finalizing those options. And once we get approval, sending those to estimators. And then we're targeting approximately 2 to 3 weeks for estimating to get that information back. And then we can come back in front of this group here. So again, that is the schedule here. If we want more than 2 rounds of review in this group, we absolutely can. This schedule, what we would recommend is tentative, depending on the development, the comments, and the feedback. But that's where we see this laying out. And again, this is the most aggressive option. It will push or can push depending on feedback and wants of this committee here. So.
And if it's okay with you, Grace, if we can skip ahead to the next item, I think it would help then inform our discussion on timeline. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So when we established the building committee, the advisory and the town meeting had asked us to delay the request for schematic design funding and explore some additional cost options. So at that time, our original intent as a committee was to establish the building committee, get the demographics done, and be ready by the May town meeting to come forward with a recommendation. Obviously, all of those phases took longer. It took us longer to get quotes and appoint a demographer. It took a while to get a committee appointed. So we're behind in terms of the schedule. Additionally, the town is in a really tough situation financially this year. So it would be my recommendation that we don't bring forward a warrant article in May and that we push that to a fall town meeting and give ourselves more time to fully vet all these options, more time to get costs out, and more time to give feedback, and instead maybe just do an update at the town meeting of the committee, the work of the committee, and then in the fall town meeting we could consider whether or not we're ready to bring forward a recommendation. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know if people feel differently, but I think it would behoove us to take the time to fully vet all these options, and I think we also need to engage the community, have a community forum, have the public be able to come in and ask questions, be able to look at the implications for taxes of whatever project is recommended. I think if we don't do that and we go too quickly, any kind of construction has to pass both at town meeting and at the ballot. And if people don't feel that they really understand what's being asked and why the recommendations are coming forward, we're not going to be successful in meeting the needs of the growing enrollment. So that would be my recommendation, open for discussion, but we do need to, I can't just cancel it because that was the task of the committee, so we would need a vote of the committee to defer or change our projected timeline.
So would the timeline then move to September town meeting? Is there a town, or
Usually
November town meeting, and
Yeah.
then we'd vote in the May election, or?
No, you could, originally when we were looking at the other project option, we would have to have a special election.
Okay.
There's a cost to that. It's about $10,000 to $12,000 to host a special election, but I still think it's in the best interest. If we were to do it, originally our goal was if we did it in May, we could have added the question to the September the presidential election, the already existing ballot.
Yep.
We won't be ready for that, so we would have only had to pay half the cost. So it'll cost about $6,000 more to delay it, but I think it's well worth it if we're more confident in the recommendation and the public is more informed.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just want to make sure the
Yep.
timeline is put out
So
there.
that would mean instead of requesting a vote at May, a member of the committee would give a report to the public, and then in November, we would put forward an article if we're ready at that time, and then we would have to schedule a special election.
Okay.
So we would need a motion on that.
I move to defer the existing warrant article relative to the school building committee to the fall town meeting warrant.
I second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
I think just this, I agree with Ingrid that it's.
We're setting ourselves up for a bad situation.
Yeah, I would much rather be very, but I do want, the goal is to have anyone who is coming forward to vote to be able to make whatever their ultimate decision is about what we recommend, to make an informed choice. And I don't want anyone to feel like any choice is being made in haste, so.
Okay. All right, so that said, Justin, looking at the timeline I know you were trying to meet our original timeline and it's quite aggressive.
Yeah.
How does the committee feel about, the amount of review you want to have of the options? I mean, I would prefer to have 3 rounds of review and stretch it out a little bit. I don't know how you all feel. Just knowing what we did with the last one, there's questions or adjustments or,
I have a couple of questions. The first being, so this first layer of quality that we're talking about, am I correct in interpreting that based upon what we've seen, I mean, that's just being presented as a baseline sort of,
Yeah,
this is what you could buy?
As cheap as you can get.
The cheapest possible option would be this, and it would not last very long?
Right,
Okay.
it's to give everybody a perspective of what the cheapest route is. We see these in districts where we actually go back and we do full building projects, and yeah, we're gonna have them for 5 years, and 30 years later, they're still there. So it's one of those where it's a stopgap.
Okay.
Realistically, is what that is.
Okay. The next question is, in looking at the feasibility of these options, which will not be physically connected to Freeman Candidate.
Yep.
Is the concept, and I'm assuming it is just from an efficiency standpoint and understanding what's involved in like education programming, but correct me if I'm wrong, we're still talking about moving pre-K? Is that we're moving pre-K classrooms into the modulars?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be what we'd anticipate, but obviously open for conversation.
Well, and I mean,
so.
that's my opinion, that's my understanding too, just because
Yep.
those students don't need, those students could, I guess, just stay in their silos because they
Right.
don't need the cafeteria, they don't need the library.
Right.
And moving any other grades would require movement between building to building, right, or modular to building.
Yeah, there's a
I
couple
guess.
of problems with moving multiple. So when we originally decided to move pre-K over, that move allows us in one addition to address the space shortage at H. Olive Day, which is already overcrowded because it would free up 5 to 6 classrooms to allow them to continue to absorb this new growth, and it would create capacity at both buildings. Also, we chose pre-K rather than moving grade 2 up because pre-K doesn't use the gym or the cafeteria for lunch or any of the, they have a different transportation, so it would not overtax the building. We already serve lunch from like 10:15 in the morning till 1:45. So we couldn't add another whole grade level of lunch, our kids could walk off the bus to lunch. So, and we just don't have the capacity, and also septic-wise, in terms of all of the gym, the library, we don't have the capacity to add classes to the schedule in those common spaces. So the move of pre-K is 100 students, but those 100 students don't use the majority of the resources. So it wouldn't create a significant modification or remodel of FK to absorb that.
Okay.
So that was the most cost efficient. So yeah, it would be pre-K and then classrooms for the FK building.
So there would be FK students in the separate building?
Yes.
The modular would have to have
That would have to
pre-K
go back and
create
forth.
classrooms for the growth in FK, because we're at capacity in FK
Yep.
next year, and we're looking at, I mean, when you look at from where we are now to where they think we'll be in 10 years, 200 plus students
Right.
that we have nowhere. So we need classrooms at both buildings.
But that means we will have
So there
students
would be
going back and
students
forth.
Moving between.
Yeah, and in
Yes.
the modular solution, we can't connect the building, because as soon as you connect it, then everything, the new code is triggered, we have to upgrade everything in the FK, which when we priced that out, Justin, I think that was a couple $1 million just to do the upgrades. And I don't think, yeah, he's gonna do this, so like a
Yeah.
couple million, like 7 or something like
Yeah.
that. So it's not feasible, it would have to be a separate space, and we'll have to look at programming, like what grade would be housed there, and they'd have to come out to.
Yeah.
Sharing.
And
Right.
where are we looking? Still behind the building, or now are we
So,
looking?
Yeah, well, we can look at a couple different options. Realistically, so the reason why we located the physical, the brick and mortar expansion where it was is because it's tied into the building. It's really connecting the two wings. It makes sense from a physical and an architectural standpoint. With modulars that aren't connecting, it logistically doesn't make sense to put it there. Because that is where all your stormwater is, that is where your septic, that is where all your utility runs, and you're really in a confined area, particularly if you can't actually connect the building. So what we would look at is locating the modular units on the other side of the building, on the front side, probably, and we'll look at this, but probably towards the corner by the gymnasium, in that parking area or up in that corner. We can't do it towards the south side parking towards district administration, because that's where the septic field is. In the center, we don't want to lose that center circulation bus drop-off or the playground. So in reality, it's probably on the northern side.
So
sort
the
of
parking
corner
lot
off
to
the
that
gym.
fielded area where the kids play at recess? That it, like, is that?
It will affect parking.
Yes.
The park
Yes.
spaces and
Yes.
some of the play area probably.
Yeah, and so part of the scope, if we put them on the parking lot, then we would replicate parking to make up for it. If we put them on the grass area, then we don't have to replicate parking, but then you're further away from the
School,
existing
that's-
building.
Yeah.
So,
Assuming that all of this will be mapped out in the different options that you...
yep, yeah, there'll be, and obviously the single story versus the two story has different footprints.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a different site cost associated with each of those based upon adding parking or paving, utility runs based upon just grading and the rest of it. It's relatively flat over there, which is good. But yeah, the nuances of the site will be captured in the estimates.
And that's kind of why I feel like 3 review periods would be better, because we may look at one option and say, we really don't like it located there. Could it move? What would that look like? And I want to have enough time for feedback so that when we get the final product, we're all 100%. It's important that this team has consensus that, yes, this is the right solution. So I feel like more time for feedback for them to then take that, like we did with the last project. We changed rooms, we said this doesn't make sense, they went back and came back with a different model. I feel like I don't want to rush that portion.
Yeah, and if there is a little bit of breathing room with the fall town meeting, we're not
Right.
forcing it into May.
Right.
So as you can see, there is time to go and have this group do their due diligence to make sure that what is.
And we don't have to be complete to do an updated town meeting in May.
No,
We can say this is
right.
what we've done so far, this is
Yep.
where we're at. I think it's important to keep the community abreast of what's happening, but we can have a community forum. And I had said September, but it could be October, it could be,
Yep.
Yeah.
whenever. I'd rather give more time on the development end and then.
Is it going to take the playground too? What was that playgrounds for people? I think you included in the cost.
We would have to because it is a.
They can't play on the
Right.
existing
Level
structure.
Barbara.
And plumbing, indoor, whether plumbing is provided.
That was my
all
next
of that.
question. Yeah, because a pre-K classroom has different requirements than, like, it's not, I think, just preparing myself mentally, like, I think a lot of times people, when they're considering a modular option, you're considering what is done at a high school. And you need, like, I don't know, a lot more bathrooms and sinks in a pre-K setup than you do for 16-year-old students. And so just the added cost of plumbing all of that and then connecting it into I'm just, it's.
But I think when you do the estimates, you'll give us the site construction work, the soft costs, and
Yep.
then the actual construction like you did before, and the plumbing, electric, all of that will be embedded in
Yeah,
some fire suppression, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be broken out in that extent because in reality, the site number for option 1 is going to be the same with the 3 levels of quality. Really, the change in number is going to be based upon the building itself. So we will be breaking out site cost, building cost, and then the other soft cost items.
Matt, any thoughts that you have or anything?
No, doesn't touch on.
Yeah, great. I don't know if everybody met Matt. Matt is our facilities director for schools and towns, and he snuck in behind class. I just want to make sure he'll be here to advise throughout. Has a wealth of knowledge about all our systems and operations, so he'll be jumping in as things come up. All right, so I think then we would need to, if everybody's comfortable with maybe adding that 3rd review, and we had talked last time about going to the bi-weekly meeting schedule. I touched base with Justin, who felt that was probably, that's what we did with the last feasibility, because there's, regular needs for feedback and discussion.
Right.
So when we talked before, I think Wednesdays were the date that was best for everyone. So that's the 2 tentative dates I gave Justin would be the 10th and the 24th. Do those dates work for people?
It should.
Works for me.
Yeah,
The 24th is the week
after.
after.
It's
Yes,
shaded.
yes, I did put rest for vacation week.
Yep.
Good. Thank you. Yes, there's a thank you for the calendar.
And then we can just continue with the every other Wednesday kind of plan, which would be the 8th. And if we need to change a specific meeting, we can do that the week before if that works.
Yeah.
I think 3 rounds of review is going to be great, because realistically, we do also need to assess whatever is presented against the original.
That's exactly what I was just going to say, because isn't that another?
That is ultimately the conversation that we're being tasked to have, so I think that I'd rather have more runway to do that and make
Yeah.
Try and come to consensus
They are
on that.
also going to need to take the new demographic study and make sure the existing meets that need. And if there's any adjustments that you would recommend to that in scope or scale or arrangement, then that would be the next thing that we'd have to talk about too.
Yeah, that's our next step, is to look at and compare the numbers to see what the increase in enrollment does from the threshold jump in classrooms. So that's our first step to see what happens, and then we'll go from there.
So,
My first review of it, I don't think it's going to be, I think it's
Yeah.
going to be okay, but that was a very rough look at.
You can absorb just in what was proposed before.
Well, just
Yeah.
when you looked at, they did a chart of the number of students, the size of the classroom, the number of the spaces, and in a quick look of that, I think, the numbers are higher, but I think it'll be okay, but that's just a very quick, I just got these.
No, I like that response, so.
That's a
Yeah,
very quick assessment, but they'll do it much more
I think
detailed.
we are,
Very close.
if we have to change, I think we're really close,
Yeah.
based upon the numbers, but let us get back to you on that, and that will obviously impact the options for the modulars provided, but also we can come back and say what would have to change based upon our previous work for the brick and mortar.
The one other thing I just wanted to highlight as far as time, so it really sounded in talking with Kristen in the results that they have, NESDEC wasn't far off, but the growth has slowed down from COVID with the real estate yield. The reality is we're already now in the 24-25 year. If we were to start a building project tomorrow, it would be 3 years before it opened. So whatever we're planning is it's not coming online immediately. It's a year of schematic design, it's a year of construction at least. So I think, we need to keep that in mind, because I think there's a sense of, okay, well, we have a couple of years now. We don't really. It's growing. Each year it's growing. We're out of space now. We're looking at 20 more kids next year, 50 more the year after. So we're already in crisis here. We're still absorbing students, and then it's going to start to grow more quickly. So I think, it's good that we went to this next feasibility study, and while we can stretch it a little bit to make sure we have a good option, we have to keep in mind that this isn't an instant turnaround.
Yeah.
And it will require 2 rounds of town meeting and ballot approval. I mean,
Right,
for the.
and then, so before you even, so you need a year of schematic design, but before you can even contract, you have to have a town meeting, a ballot election, you have to develop bid specs, you have to bid for, it's 60 days to do that. You're not even appointing an architect for the design work for a full year. And then it's a year, and then it's a year, so it's 3
With
years
another round
after
of a
students
town
if we
meeting
have
for the
no
final project
glitches.
and then another ballot vote. So, which is great, everyone should have a chance to be heard, but
Right.
it's not.
So best case
Building a
scenario,
house.
we're really planning for 28, 29, 29, 30?
At the earliest, yeah, I think, and so when we're looking at where the numbers start to even exceed NESDEC, we're right aligned with where that, juncture happens. And it does leave us with 3 years struggling to keep this.
Yeah, sure.
There's
Yeah.
60, 70 new students that we're going to struggle with over the next few years. But yeah, I think I'm probably optimistic to say 3 years. It's probably closer to 3.5, 4.
Yeah, I am loath, after looking at this for 7 years at this point, to postpone at all a week, let alone May into November. But I mean, we need to come as a committee to a consensus on what it is that needs to be recommended, and it's not going to be small no matter what we choose. So the town should have the opportunity to be informed.
Absolutely, and I do think
Do our best to inform.
the unexpected impact of COVID gave the town a breather. It gave us a breather on the budget situation because there were some state monies that came in. It gave you a chance because things slowed down a little bit, so we have a little time to plan, but it's not that much, and it's catching up quickly, so.
And to be honest with you, I think the gap between May and November or September, whatever it ends up being, in the grand scheme,
It's
is not that big a deal,
Okay.
especially when you're talking about something where, giving the townspeople time to give feedback, time to digest it, time to give them a little space between this proposal and the fire department and all the other things that are drawing on the town. Because again, I think if you rush this into May, I think the townspeople are going to spit back in your face.
I agree.
Well, and I don't think we can in good faith get it done. Like, I mean, not that you
The
can't
level
return
that
fees,
you want.
the night before, if you give us your
Right.
results, I'm
Right.
not getting, nobody should be asked to get up and ask for a whole bunch of money to do something that, it feels rushed.
And I really do think, like, when we did the other feasibility study, we had 3 different events, community forums, where we had the public come in and presented and answered questions, and we had 15, 20 people at some of those. So the more time we can get people to make sure, I don't ever want somebody to vote on something they don't feel like they understand. We want to make sure we give opportunity. I guess all I'm saying is, even given that this is spread over more time, we've lost time in our planning.
No,
I 100% agree we should defer this, we should do it thoroughly, but we can't say, all right, let's table this for 2 years and come back to it. Like, there is a long period of time that it takes to bring a project online, so that's why I want to make.
And we've already tabled it. So,
I want to be clear, like, I wholeheartedly support waiting until the fall, but the fall is really a year's delay, because we were before the town last, our intention had been to go before the fall town meeting this past year. And so I think it is very important to present all of the options, and I think that, this delay will not, hopefully, submarine the school district, in as far as enrollment that's coming online, but I think that past that point.
A little bit of slowdown that happened from COVID is allowed.
And, some of the families making other choices has been helpful, and, it's great that not every eligible student is entering the school system, but I do think, there is an urgency to it, but I agree that it is better to take the time. I saw Justin sit up straighter when he said we would wait until fall meetings. Yeah.
And I'd also like to point out that, what do you call it? Yes, there's this blip coming in the next couple of years, but this decision will impact the school system going forward,
Right.
10, 20 years maybe, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like, the decisions that were made for the original school system, obviously those kind of changed 10 years. So I think that taking our time and doing this right,
I agree.
and, getting the town to digest it, figuring out the financing is going to be really, really important, to come to the right decision. Because again, like I said, from knowing people in town, they are not super stoked on, like, with the, what the rumor mill in terms of costs and stuff. If we don't come to them with facts and figures that they're ready to digest, it's going to be a real problem.
I 100% agree, and I think that's important that we now we need to find other ways to get more people engaged, because we have the same 20 people at all our forums, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think the one thing that I think there is some misinformation out in the public. I think there have been some speculation, well, when you built the Freeman, which happened before I came, but when you built the Freeman, why wasn't it built for growth? I think one thing that not everybody is aware of is the Freeman Kennedy project was built with MSBA, Mass School Building Authority funding, which means that the state paid for half of the cost of the building, which saved the town a lot. But when you build with MSBA, you cannot build. They will not fund for future. They will only allow you to build for current growth. So the town could have opted to, on their own, build a bigger building, but MSBA wouldn't have funded any of those additional spaces. So it was built to the size, and probably long-term, a good financial decision, because if you had built extra, you would have had 10 years of unoccupied space. So I don't think that the town made a poor choice. They got 52% of the funding for that project from the state, and it served its needs for 10 years. We're looking at an expansion, not a new building.
Oh yeah, I'm not knocking.
No, I'm clarifying for the public, the large viewing audience that I'm watching tonight. So, because that has been, I've heard that, like, well, why are we going to build this now? Why wasn't it done originally? And it was really, actually a smart, savvy decision of the town to participate with MSBA. So I just hope that the public we can get that message out too.
Is there an opportunity, and I don't know if you'd be able to participate, but if we hadn't, once we get everything, and maybe we have some internal debates and whatever, that we have a meeting, an open meeting on all 3 to go through pros and cons, because I do think that, in knee-jerk, people will be like, just like a bottle of wine at the restaurant. They're not gonna be like, I want the cheapest, and they're not gonna be like, I want the most expensive. I want the middle, and it'll be fine, without really understanding the nuance. So
we could have a community forum when we get to, I mean.
with like all 3.
Well, this is just for the modular.
Right, but our charter is to put forward what we think is best. Modular, or.
Yeah, that's.
So what I'm saying is, allow people in on what we're looking at, pros and cons, right? So to say like.
So we could have what we did with the prior feasibility study, we can have community forums partway through. Say, this is what we've got to date, this is what we're thinking about, take questions and feedback from the community, come back as a committee and keep going. So we can do that throughout if we want to do that.
And town meeting might be a good place to gauge how people are feeling, right? And so I think that actually works in our favor, but I do think with the financial situation right now in the town, facts are important because, you know, I think we don't want to be penny wise, pound foolish and end up having to redo it in 5 years, so.
And quite frankly, the way that it will be funded will have an impact on every citizen, so we want people to really understand it. So, yeah, I think we could, after the next meeting, look at the options, look at where we are, and we could schedule a community forum to just, you know, we could have demographic advisors present so that people understand the enrollment situation. We could talk about where we are. We don't have to wait till we have a final recommendation to do a community.
Because I just think, you know, to stop the swirl, to get more people involved, but, I mean, and we'll have
Perhaps
to.
to present actual facts, which are always important, actual facts around what I have heard every time someone mentions to me the first solution that was looked at. I have heard the estimated cost of that increase by around 11% every time it is mentioned to me. So I think that it would be fair to say, you know, this is an overview of what has been looked at previously. This is the estimated cost. That is a fact.
And on the other side, I think I heard somebody at a, you know, get-together the other day say, well, just to be clear, I'm against trailers. And I was like, well, it's not trailers, right? So I think, you know, there's a lot.
And to address something that you mentioned before that, you know, if, maybe reputation of the school district and whatnot, I do think, you know, taking the time, once the gears are turning, if the town does approve the plan and all that, I think the reputation will be, wow, look, Norfolk they took their time, they're investing in the school system, versus like, you know, I don't think the 1 year or 6 months difference is gonna, you know, oh man, Norfolk doesn't invest in their school system versus, oh wow, they're investing a ton of money. It's,
I don't think there's anyone that would argue that the taxpayers of Norfolk don't invest in the school system. As a taxpayer of Norfolk. I think, and, you know, I mean, I know both from an operating standpoint and a capital standpoint, you know, the district is grateful for that. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think we are generally in agreement. My personal anxiety around the delay ties back to, you know, things were supposed to be started. You know, I mean, it's just, it's
not one,
because,
we don't want to have to put a stopgap solution in place too. And, you know, so I get that. But I also think, I think everybody's on the same page. Taking the time, doing it right, inviting the public, making sure we get questions answered, serves everybody well, and will let us hopefully come forward with a strong solution that we're not going to ever have 100% of people agreeing, but at least if we feel that it's been fully vetted, we're better off. And I think, I will go on record saying, I think the first feasibility study and the process we followed was very thorough and comprehensive. I think what happened is COVID hit and circumstances changed. And so I think it's very fair to say, step back and make sure we understand that this enrollment is really going to happen. Are we really planning appropriately? So while it was a setback, I don't think the last process went from 2017 to 23. It was 6 years of study and a full year of feasibility. I think it was a very thorough. We had a lot of community forums, but circumstances changed unpredictably everywhere. So I would
say it wasn't just the Norfolk school system that had
everywhere.
issues in 2020
so stopping and saying, let's recalibrate and understand what's happened and what the impact will be, I think is in the end a wise choice.
And taking the, I mean, honestly, like the time delay, just personally, I get anxious about it because, again, it's been a long time, but the updated demographic study, I mean, that was tremendously wonderful. Like, it was so thorough, and the detail of the data, I think, was...
They did a really good job.
They do a lot for, like, the entire state of Connecticut and North Carolina. They're very experienced, so... and I thought it was helpful that they looked at multiple sources. They pulled in the CMU Institute, state data, a lot of local data, so I feel it's always good to have two opinions, and you know, having that re-looked at in a new climate, new economy, new conditions, to make sure we are, again, not short-sighted in our plan, I think is going to serve us well in the long run. Okay.
All right. Any questions, comments? We good? All right.
Question down.
Yeah, me too. Then we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry, I do have one.
Yeah.
I know maybe it's a green thing or something, but if possible for future meetings, especially when he starts having charts and whatnot, if we could print in color, is that possible? Because like I'm looking at his, I'm like, oh, I can actually read what his says, for some of the, like, for some of the graphs, for instance, if it's possible, I don't know.
Yeah, I can try to do that, and.
But again, if it's just Word, I don't care, but if it's
Yeah.
like, for some of the stuff that's like the graphs where it's light blue, blue
Yeah.
and gray, it
Right.
just doesn't mean anything to me now.
Yeah, absolutely, we can try to do that. We're over our printing budget at the school, so we're trying to be cautious, but we can do
in the
that.
school district.
Gotcha.
But even if we can get it up, because I mean, I was like, just, you know, doing arrows to make sure that I knew what was what, so.
We try to send everything out in advance. We just got that at 4
No,
o'clock.
I knew this one was coming in like the
Normally,
last
yeah.
minute, I know, yeah.
But-
Again, I could even print it on my own office printer, if
Yeah,
possible,
we'll
you
make
know.
sure that we
But
find
yeah,
it.
just
There's
certain charts, it's just, I'm just looking at it like, I'm just like,
Which line's later? Yeah, it's definitely, we can do that.
sorry about that.
No, I appreciate you.
Continue.
All right, so then now I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Excellent. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.